In 1983, a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet performed an experiment at the University of California, San Francisco, that shattered one of the deepest assumptions in human history, that you are the author of your own decisions. The experiment was simple. Participants sat in front of a clock, a specially designed clock with a single dot sweeping around its face, like the second hand of a watch, but faster. They were asked to do one thing. Whenever they felt the urge to move their wrist, move it. And note the position of the dot on the clock at the exact moment they felt the conscious intention to move, the moment they decided now. While the participants watched the clock and waited for the urge to arise, Libet measured the electrical activity in their brains using electroencephalography. He was looking for a signal called the Bereitschaftspotential, the readiness potential, a build-up of electrical activity in the motor cortex that precedes voluntary movement. The readiness potential had been discovered in 1964 by Hans Helmut Kornhuber and Luder Dieker at the University of Freiburg, and it was known to begin approximately 1 to 1.5 seconds before a voluntary action. Libet wanted to know, does the readiness potential begin before or after the conscious decision to act? The answer was before. Significantly before. The readiness potential began approximately 550 milliseconds, more than half a second, before the participant reported the conscious intention to move. The brain was preparing the movement before the person decided to make it. The electrical activity that initiated the action was underway before the conscious mind was aware that any decision had been made. The decision, it appeared, was not made by the conscious self. It was made by the brain by unconscious neural processes operating below the threshold of awareness, and the conscious experience of deciding was a notification after the fact, an announcement of a decision already taken, a press release from a government that had already acted. The readiness potential did not merely precede the conscious decision by a small margin that could be attributed to measurement, imprecision, or subjective timing errors. 550 milliseconds is a long time. In neural terms, long enough for the brain to execute multiple processing steps, to recruit motor programs, to prepare the specific muscles involved in the action. The entire neural machinery of the movement was engaged and committed before the conscious mind reported any awareness of an intention. The brain was not waiting for the mind's permission. It was acting on its own and then sending a memo to consciousness informing it that a decision had been made. Libet's experimental design included careful controls for the accuracy of subjective timing reports. He calibrated the clock's dot speed. He tested participants' ability to accurately time external events like a skin stimulus and found that their timing accuracy was approximately 50 milliseconds. Far less than the 550 millisecond gap between the readiness potential and the reported decision. The gap was real. It was not an artifact of imprecise self-reporting. The brain genuinely preceded consciousness. The implications were devastating. If the brain initiates actions before conscious awareness of the decision to act, then conscious will the feeling that you are the one choosing, that you are the agent, that you are in control is an illusion. You do not choose to move your wrist. Your brain chooses to move your wrist, and then informs you that you chose. The sequence is not decision, then brain activity, then action. The sequence is brain activity, then decision, then action. Consciousness arrives too late to be the cause. It is the effect, a downstream consequence of neural processes that were completed before awareness began. Libet published his results in the journal Brain in 1983. The paper ignited a controversy that has not subsided in 4 decades. Philosophers, neuroscientists, theologians, legal scholars, and ordinary people recognized immediately that if Libet was right, the consequences extended far beyond the neuroscience laboratory. If conscious will is an illusion, then moral responsibility is an illusion. If you did not choose your actions, you cannot be blamed for them or praised for them. The entire edifice of human law, ethics, and religion, built on the assumption that human beings are agents who freely choose their actions and bear responsibility for those choices, rests on a foundation that Libet's experiment appeared to demolish. But Libet himself did not draw this conclusion. In a remarkable act of intellectual honesty that is often overlooked in popular accounts of his work, Libet pointed out that his experiment contained a finding that was as important as the readiness potential and far more hopeful. He noticed that participants could veto the movement. The readiness potential would begin. The brain would prepare the action. The conscious mind would become aware of the urge to move. And then, in some trials, the participant would decide not to move. They would cancel the action. The readiness potential would collapse. The movement would not occur. Libet called this the free won't, the conscious veto. The brain initiates, but consciousness can stop. This changes everything. If consciousness cannot initiate actions, if the brain begins before awareness begins, but consciousness can veto actions, then free will is not the power to create choices from nothing. It is the power to select among choices that the brain offers. The brain generates options. Consciousness evaluates them. And consciousness has the authority to say no. This is not the libertarian free will of classical philosophy, the uncaused cause, the prime mover of action. It is something subtler and, Libet argued, more realistic, a limited but genuine volitional capacity, the capacity to restrain, to override, to redirect, not to initiate the game, but to shape how it is played. The scientific community was not satisfied with Libet's veto. Some argued that the veto itself might be preceded by unconscious brain activity, that the decision to cancel the action might also be initiated by the brain before consciousness becomes aware of it. If so, the veto is no more free than the original impulse. It is just another brain event dressed up as a conscious choice. This objection has force, but it has not been experimentally resolved. No one has demonstrated a readiness potential for the veto, a neural precursor to the decision to cancel. The veto remains an open question, not a refuted hypothesis. In 2012, Aaron Scherger at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne in Switzerland published a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that challenged the very foundation of Libet's interpretation. Scherger argued that the readiness potential is not a marker of unconscious decision-making. It is a marker of neural noise, random fluctuations in brain activity that periodically cross a threshold and trigger movement. In Scherger's model, the brain does not make a decision and then inform consciousness. The brain's baseline activity fluctuates randomly. When the fluctuation exceeds a threshold, a process governed by stochastic dynamics, not by a hidden decision maker, the movement is triggered. The participant experiences the threshold crossing as a decision, but it is not a decision in any meaningful sense. It is a random fluctuation that happened to cross a line. Scherger's model is elegant and mathematically rigorous. It explains the variable timing of the readiness potential, something Libet's interpretation does not easily account for. It explains why the readiness potential is sometimes absent even when voluntary movements occur, and it reframes the entire debate. If the readiness potential is not a decision signal, then Libet's experiment does not demonstrate that the brain decides before consciousness. It demonstrates that random neural fluctuations trigger movements that consciousness retrospectively claims as decisions. This is a different problem, not the absence of free will, but the absence of deliberate initiation for arbitrary, meaningless actions like wrist flicking. The experiment may say nothing about the kind of decisions that actually matter, moral choices, life decisions, creative acts which involve extended deliberation, multiple brain systems, and conscious evaluation of alternatives. Adina Roskies, a philosopher of neuroscience at Dartmouth, has pressed this point. She argues that the Libet paradigm is ecologically invalid. It asks participants to make arbitrary, meaningless decisions when to flick a wrist, which button to press, and draws conclusions about all human decision-making. But the decisions that define human life, whether to marry, whether to forgive, whether to sacrifice, whether to create, are not arbitrary. They involve values, reasons, deliberation, and conscious evaluation of competing goods. The neural processes underlying these decisions may be fundamentally different from the processes underlying arbitrary motor actions. Libet's experiment may have discovered something important about impulsive motor initiation. It may have discovered nothing about moral agency. Patrick Haggard at University College London has conducted experiments that support this distinction. Haggard's work on intentional binding, the temporal compression between a voluntary action and its effect, shows that the brain processes voluntary and involuntary actions through distinct neural mechanisms. Voluntary actions produce a specific temporal illusion. The action and its consequence are perceived as closer in time than they actually are. Involuntary actions do not produce this illusion. This suggests that the brain distinguishes between actions it initiates and actions that happen to it, and that the distinction is real, not confabulated. Consciousness may not initiate the readiness potential for a wrist flick, but consciousness may genuinely initiate the complex, deliberated, value-laden decisions that define moral agency. In 2008, John Dylan Haynes at the Bernstein Center for Computational Neuroscience in Berlin took Libet's experiment to a new level. Haynes used functional magnetic resonance imaging fMRI, which has far greater spatial resolution than EEG, allowing researchers to identify specific brain regions involved in decision-making. Participants were placed in the scanner and asked to freely decide between pressing a button with their left hand or their right hand, whenever they felt the urge to do so. They watched a stream of letters on a screen and reported which letter was showing at the moment they felt the conscious decision to press. Haynes and his team used pattern classification algorithms, machine learning techniques, that can detect subtle patterns in brain activity to decode the participants' decisions from their fMRI data. The results extended Libet's findings by an order of magnitude. The algorithms could predict which hand the participant would choose, left or right, up to 7 seconds before the participant reported the conscious decision. 7 seconds, not half a second. 7 full seconds of brain activity involving specific patterns in the frontopolar cortex and the precuneus brain regions associated with planning, self-reflection, and the integration of intention preceded the conscious experience of choosing. The brain had committed to a specific choice, left or right, nearly 10 seconds before the person felt that they were making the choice. The finding was deeply unsettling because 7 seconds is an eternity in neural terms. It is not a subtle timing difference that could be explained by measurement error or response delay. It is a window long enough to complete a sentence, to take a breath, to walk across a room. During those 7 seconds, the participant feels nothing, no urge, no inclination, no preference. They experience themselves as open, undecided, free, and yet their brain has already committed. The pattern is already there, readable by a machine learning algorithm, predicting which hand will move before the mind knows which hand it will choose. Haynes's findings were replicated and extended by Chun-Seong Soon and colleagues, who published additional analyses confirming the 7 to 10 second prediction window. The results were consistent across participants, across sessions, and across analytical methods. The prediction accuracy was not perfect, approximately 60%, compared to a chance level of 50%. This imperfect accuracy is important, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, the fact that brain activity predicts the decision at all before the person is conscious of deciding supports the determinist position. On the other hand, the fact that the prediction is only 60% accurate barely above chance, means that 40% of the time, the brain's early activity does not predict the actual decision. The person does something different from what the brain appeared to be preparing. There is a gap, a substantial margin of unpredictability between what the brain's early activity predicts and what the person actually does. Whether this gap represents genuine freedom, quantum indeterminacy, the influence of additional brain regions not captured by the fMRI, or merely noise in the measurement, is one of the most consequential, unanswered questions in neuroscience. It is also worth noting what the Haynes experiment does not show. It does not show that the brain has made a final, irrevocable commitment 7 seconds before the conscious decision. It shows that a pattern detectable by a machine learning algorithm trained on thousands of trials is present in the brain 7 seconds before the person reports deciding. But the pattern is probabilistic, not deterministic. It biases the outcome. It does not guarantee it. And the difference between a bias and a determination may be the space in which freedom operates. The determinist interpretation, championed most forcefully by the neuroscientist Sam Harris in his 2012 book Free Will, argues that the gap is noise. Harris argues that every decision you make is the product of prior causes, neural activity, genetic predisposition, environmental conditioning, neurochemical state, and that the conscious experience of choosing is an epiphenomenon with no causal power. You do not choose your thoughts. Thoughts arise in consciousness from causes you did not choose and cannot control. You cannot even choose what to think next. Your next thought will arrive unbidden, produced by processes in the brain that operate entirely without your consent or awareness. Free will, in Harris's view, is not merely an illusion. It is an incoherent concept, like a square circle or a married bachelor. There is no place in the causal chain of neural events for a free agent to intervene. The chain is complete without one. Daniel Wegner, a social psychologist at Harvard, arrived at a similar conclusion through a different route. In his 2002 book, The Illusion of Conscious Will, Wegner argued that the experience of willing an action is constructed by the brain after the action has been initiated. The brain monitors its own activity, notices that an intention preceded an action, and constructs the narrative that the intention caused the action. But the narrative is confabulation. The intention and the action are both products of underlying neural processes, and the feeling that the intention caused the action is the brain's way of creating a coherent story about its own behavior. We feel like agents because the brain tells us we are agents, but the feeling is a construction, not a report. Wegner supported this claim with striking experimental demonstrations. In one experiment, the I Spy study participants placed their hands on a board alongside a Confederate. Both could move the board, but in key trials, only the Confederate moved it. When the participant heard a word related to the object the board pointed to just before the movement, priming the idea of causing that specific outcome, the participant reported feeling that they had intentionally moved the board. The feeling of willing was manufactured by the experimental setup. It had no connection to actual causation. In another line of research, Wegner studied cases of automatism actions performed without conscious intention, such as Ouija board movements and facilitated communication, and showed that participants genuinely felt they were not causing movements they were actually producing. The feeling of willing can be created where no will exists, and it can be absent where will is operating. The feeling and the reality are dissociable. The philosophical implications reach far beyond neuroscience. If free will is an illusion, the consequences cascade through every domain of human life. Criminal justice assumes that offenders chose their actions and could have done otherwise. Moral philosophy assumes that ethical judgments apply to agents who are free to act on them. Religion assumes that faith, sin, and redemption are meaningful categories that apply to beings who genuinely choose. Democracy assumes that voters make free choices. Education assumes that students can choose to learn. Therapy assumes that patients can choose to change. If all of these assumptions are wrong, if the feeling of choice is a post hoc narrative constructed by a brain that was already committed before consciousness arrived, then the entire architecture of human civilization rests on a foundation of illusion. But the determinist's case, powerful as it is, rests on an assumption that is far less secure than it appears. The assumption that the brain is a classical physical system, a system governed by deterministic laws in which every state is fully determined by the prior state. If the brain is classical, then determinism follows necessarily. Every neural event is caused by prior neural events, which were caused by prior neural events, all the way back to the Big Bang. There is no room for freedom because there are no gaps in the causal chain. But the brain is not a classical system, it is a quantum system. Its fundamental components, the ions that flow through channels, the neurotransmitters that bind to receptors, the electrons that mediate chemical bonds, obey quantum mechanics, not classical mechanics. And quantum mechanics, as we have seen throughout these investigations, does not guarantee determinism. It introduces something that classical physics explicitly excludes: genuine indeterminacy. The outcome of a quantum measurement is not determined by the prior state of the system. It is probabilistic. The wave function contains multiple possible outcomes, and which outcome becomes actual is not fixed until the measurement occurs. The significance of this for free will cannot be overstated. Classical determinism, the worldview articulated most famously by Pierre-Simon Laplace in 1814, holds that if you knew the position and momentum of every particle in the universe at any given moment, you could calculate every future event with perfect accuracy. The future is contained in the present. The present was contained in the past. Everything that will ever happen was determined at the Big Bang, including every thought you will think, every choice you will make, every word you will speak. In Laplace's universe, the feeling of choosing is a hallucination produced by a brain that cannot see the causal chains that determine it. You are a clockwork mechanism that happens to produce the illusion of agency. You are an automaton that dreams it is free. Laplace's demon, the hypothetical intelligence that could predict everything, has haunted the free will debate for 2 centuries. It is the logical endpoint of Newtonian mechanics. If every physical event is determined by prior physical events through deterministic laws, and if the brain is a physical system, then the brain is determined. Every neuron that fires was caused to fire by the prior state of the brain. Every thought that arises was produced by the prior thought. Every decision was inevitable from the moment of the Big Bang. The chain of causation is unbroken, unbreakable, and complete. There is no room for a free agent to intervene because there are no gaps in the chain. The clockwork turns, the gears mesh, and the output, the thought, the choice, the action, follows with the same inevitability as the swing of a pendulum. This picture is internally consistent. It is logically coherent. It accounts for the Libet data, the Haynes data, and the Wegner data without difficulty. But it rests on classical physics. And classical physics has been superseded. Quantum mechanics replaced Newton's deterministic equations with probability amplitudes. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle placed a fundamental limit on how precisely the position and momentum of a particle can be simultaneously known, not as a limitation of measurement technology, but as a feature of reality itself. The particle does not have a precise position and momentum before measurement. It exists in a superposition of possibilities, and the measurement selects one. The question of whether quantum effects influence neural processes is no longer purely theoretical. We have already seen in our investigations of quantum biology that quantum coherence operates in photosynthesis, avian navigation, enzyme catalysis, and potentially olfaction. The brain is a biological system. If other biological systems exploit quantum effects, the brain may too. Gustavo Beck and colleagues at the National University of Singapore have shown that ion channels the protein structures that control the flow of ions across neural membranes, and therefore control whether a neuron fires operate at energy scales where quantum tunneling is relevant. The opening and closing of an ion channel is not a purely classical process. It involves quantum mechanical probabilities. This means that whether a specific neuron fires at a specific moment is not fully determined by the prior classical state of the brain. It is influenced by quantum probabilities that are irreducibly indeterminate. If neural processes involve quantum events, if the release of a neurotransmitter vesicle, the opening of an ion channel, the binding of a molecule to a receptor involves quantum mechanical probabilities, then the deterministic chain is broken at the most fundamental level. The brain is not a clockwork mechanism, it is a quantum system, and quantum systems are not deterministic. They are probabilistic. The same initial state can produce different outcomes on different occasions, not because of hidden variables, not because of uncontrolled environmental factors, but because quantum mechanics is fundamentally indeterministic. Bell's theorem, which we explored in our investigation of non-locality, proved that no theory of local hidden variables can reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics. The indeterminacy is real. It is not a gap in our knowledge, it is a feature of reality. But here is the crucial objection, and it is an objection that must be confronted honestly, because it is the strongest argument against quantum free will. Indeterminacy is not freedom. If the release of a neurotransmitter is governed by quantum probabilities rather than deterministic laws, that does not mean you chose whether the neurotransmitter was released. It means the outcome was random. And random is not the same as free. A decision governed by the roll of a quantum die is not a free decision. It is a lucky or unlucky accident. Replacing determinism with randomness does not rescue free will. It merely replaces one enemy of freedom with another. Determinism says your choices are caused by prior events. Randomness says your choices are caused by nothing. Neither picture includes an agent who genuinely chooses. This is the impasse that has paralyzed the free will debate for decades. Determinism eliminates freedom. Indeterminism eliminates agency. And the philosophical landscape seems to offer only two options. You are a puppet whose strings are pulled by prior causes, or you are a puppet whose strings are cut and who flails randomly. Neither is free. But there may be a third option. Between determinism and randomness, between the iron chain of causation and the chaos of quantum dice, there may be a mode of operation that is neither caused nor random, a mode in which the conscious agent participates in the determination of outcomes without either causing them from nothing or merely observing them passively. This third option is not philosophical speculation. It is a feature of quantum mechanics, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science, and it is the option that the traditions, across every continent and every century, have been describing in their own languages for thousands of years. The Christian tradition does not teach determinism. It does not teach randomness. It teaches that human beings are created with genuine but limited freedom, a freedom that operates within the framework of divine providence, a freedom that is real but not absolute, a freedom that involves the capacity to cooperate with or resist a divine purpose that exceeds human comprehension. Augustine, Aquinas, Calvin, and the Orthodox Fathers disagree profoundly about the details, about the relationship between grace and will, about the extent of human autonomy, about the mechanics of predestination and election. But they agree on the structure. Human beings are neither puppets nor gods. They are participants, agents who operate within a reality they did not create and cannot fully control, but in which their choices are genuinely meaningful. The Buddhist tradition does not teach determinism either, despite the popular misunderstanding that karma is fatalism. The Buddha explicitly rejected both eternalism, the view that the self is fixed and determined, and nihilism, the view that nothing matters and actions have no consequences. He taught the middle way, a path between the extremes. Karma is not fate. Karma is the principle that intentional actions produce consequences, and that new intentional actions can modify, redirect, and ultimately liberate the stream of consequences. The key word is intentional. Citana intention, volition, the directing of the mind is what creates karma, not mechanical causation, not random fluctuation, intentional action. The Buddhist path exists because the mind has the capacity to direct itself, to choose where to attend, what to cultivate, how to respond. If this capacity were illusory, if the mind were fully determined by prior causes, then the entire Buddhist path would be incoherent. You cannot instruct someone to meditate if they have no capacity to choose to meditate. The Hindu tradition frames the question through the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most profound treatments of free will in all of world literature. Arjuna, the warrior prince, stands on the battlefield facing his own relatives and teachers. He must choose, fight or withdraw, kill or refuse to kill, fulfill his dharma as a warrior, or follow his compassion as a human being. He is paralyzed by the choice. And Krishna, his charioteer, who is also the divine incarnation, instructs him, not by removing the choice, not by determining the outcome, by illuminating the framework within which the choice operates. Krishna does not tell Arjuna what to choose. He tells Arjuna how to choose, how to act without attachment to the fruit of action, how to perform his duty without being enslaved by the consequences, how to be an agent without being owned by agency. The Gita's answer to the free will problem is not determinism or libertarianism. It is a third thing, a mode of action in which the individual participates in a cosmic process without either controlling it or being controlled by it. These are not primitive answers to a modern question. They are sophisticated descriptions of a relationship between individual agency and cosmic order that the modern debate has not yet caught up with. And the next part of this investigation will show that quantum mechanics, specifically the observer effect, the quantum Zeno effect, and the Conway-Kochen Free Will Theorem provides the physical framework in which this third option becomes not merely philosophically attractive, but scientifically precise. The physics of this possibility is precise. The tradition's descriptions of it are ancient, and the convergence between them is, once again, too exact to be coincidental. Between determinism and randomness, quantum mechanics offers a third possibility. It is not a compromise. It is not a splitting of the difference. It is a fundamentally different picture of reality, one in which the concepts of caused and random do not exhaust the options, and in which the observer plays a role that neither classical determinism nor classical randomness can accommodate. Understanding this third possibility requires going deeper into quantum mechanics than the popular accounts of free will typically venture. But the depth is necessary, because the answer to the question, "Are you free?" depends, with surprising precision, on the answer to the question, "What kind of universe do you live in?" And quantum mechanics has changed the answer to the second question in ways that most people, including most neuroscientists, have not yet absorbed. The starting point is the Conway-Kochen Free Will Theorem, published in 2006 by John Horton Conway, one of the most brilliant mathematicians of the 20th century, and Simon Kochen, a mathematical logician at Princeton. The theorem is not a philosophical argument. It is a mathematical proof as rigorous as any theorem in mathematics. And what it proves is this: if certain elementary particles have the property that their behavior is not determined by the entire prior history of the universe, if particles have even a minimal degree of indeterminacy, then human experimenters who choose which measurements to perform also have a degree of indeterminacy. In other words, if particles are free, then so are we. The theorem rests on three axioms that are experimentally established. The first is the spin axiom, a property of entangled particles measured in quantum experiments that produces specific, quantized outcomes. The second is the twin axiom, the perfect correlations between entangled particles demonstrated in Bell test experiments, the same experiments that won the 2022 Nobel Prize. The third is the min axiom, the assumption that the experimenter's choice of which measurement to perform is not determined by the prior state of the particles being measured. MIN is the free will assumption applied to the experimenter. It says that the physicist who decides whether to measure spin along the x-axis or the z-axis is not forced into that choice by the universe's prior history. The physicist could have chosen differently. Conway and Kochen proved that if these three axioms hold, then the particles' responses to measurement cannot be determined by the prior history of the universe. The particles are free in the precise sense that their behavior is not a function of information available before the measurement. The word free here is not a metaphor. Conway and Kochen chose it deliberately. They defined freedom precisely. An entity is free if its behavior is not determined by any information in its past. Like Kohn, the entire history of events that could have causally influenced it. Particles, according to the theorem, meet this definition. Their measurement outcomes are not functions of anything that happened before the measurement. They are genuinely new, not caused, not predetermined, not contained in any prior state. And here is the critical step. The theorem proves that the particle's freedom and the experimenter's freedom are logically linked. You cannot have one without the other. If the particles are determined if their responses are fixed before measurement, then the experimenters are determined too. Their choices were not choices at all, but the inevitable consequences of the prior state of the universe. If the experimenters are free, if their measurement choices are not fixed in advance, then the particles are free too. Freedom is all or nothing. Either the universe is completely determined, every particle, every experimenter, every choice, every thought, or both particles and experimenters possess a genuine degree of indeterminacy. Conway later published a stronger version, the strong free will theorem, in 2009, which relaxed some of the original assumptions and made the result even more general. The strong version requires only that the experimenter's choices are not determined by the particles they are about to measure, not that the choices are completely uncaused. This is a minimal assumption. It says merely that the physicist in Geneva and the physicist in Vienna, measuring entangled particles on opposite sides of a continent, are not secretly controlled by the particles they are about to measure. It says that experimenters have at least as much independence from the particles as the particles have from the experimental setup. This is so minimal an assumption that rejecting it requires believing in a cosmic conspiracy of extraordinary precision, which leads directly to superdeterminism. The theorem does not prove that humans have free will in the full philosophical sense. It proves something more modest but more rigorous. That if we grant even a minimal degree of freedom to human experimenters, the freedom to choose which measurement to perform, which button to press, which question to ask, then the same degree of freedom must be attributed to elementary particles. The universe is free, or it is not. There is no middle ground in which particles are determined, but experimenters are free. This is where superdeterminism enters the picture, the last refuge of those who wish to preserve complete determinism in the face of quantum mechanics. Gerard Hooft, a Nobel laureate in physics, has championed superdeterminism, the view that everything in the universe, including the experimenter's choices, is determined by initial conditions at the Big Bang. In a superdeterminist universe, the experimenter who chooses to measure spin along the x-axis was always going to make that choice. The choice was encoded in the initial conditions of the universe 14 billion years ago. Bell's theorem does not apply because the min axiom fails the experimenter's choice, and the particles' state are correlated through their shared causal history, extending back to the origin of the universe. Superdeterminism is logically consistent. No experiment can refute it, because any experiment designed to test it would itself be determined by the same initial conditions it is trying to investigate. The experimenter's choice of how to test superdeterminism would be determined by superdeterminism. This is the theory's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. It is unfalsifiable. It cannot be tested. It cannot be distinguished, even in principle, from a universe that is genuinely indeterminate. And a theory that cannot be tested, that makes no predictions that differ from its alternative, is not a scientific theory in any meaningful sense. It is a metaphysical commitment, a philosophical choice to believe in determinism, despite the evidence, not because of it. Bell himself, the physicist whose theorem made the debate possible, rejected superdeterminism. He called it a conspiracy theory of the universe, the idea that the initial conditions of the Big Bang were arranged in precisely the way necessary to produce the illusion of quantum indeterminacy while actually being fully determined. The fine-tuning required is extraordinary. Every experimenter's every choice, in every laboratory, on every day, in every country, he would have to be correlated with the state of every particle. They measure correlated through a chain of causation, extending across 14 billion years and billions of light-years of space. The universe would have to be conspiring at every moment to make determinism look like indeterminacy. Bell found this implausible. Most physicists agree. Superdeterminism remains a minority position, logically possible but scientifically unproductive. The Big Bell test of 2018, an international experiment involving over 100,000 human participants from around the world, was designed partly to address the superdeterminist loophole. Instead of using random number generators to determine measurement settings, the experiment used human choices participants pressing buttons on their phones to generate the random inputs. The idea was that if superdeterminism requires the measurement settings to be correlated with the particles through prior causes, then using human choices as settings makes the conspiracy even more extreme. It would require that the button-pressing choices of 100,000 people in dozens of countries were all predetermined in a way that correlates, with the particles being measured in 12 separate laboratories. The results confirmed the violation of Bell's inequality. Quantum indeterminacy survived even when human free will was used as the randomness source. Either the 100,000 participants were free and the particles were free, or the conspiracy extends to every human choice made during the experiment. The experiment cannot definitively rule out superdeterminism, but it makes the conspiracy hypothesis so extravagant that most physicists regard it as effectively refuted. If superdeterminism is rejected, if the min axiom holds, then the Conway-Kochen theorem establishes that particles are free. And if particles are free, then the building blocks of the brain are free. The ions that flow through neural channels, the neurotransmitters that bind to receptors, the electrons that mediate synaptic transmission, all of these are quantum systems, and all of them possess the indeterminacy that the theorem attributes to particles. The brain is not a clockwork mechanism. It is a quantum system, and quantum systems are free in the precise mathematical sense established by Conway and Kochen. But freedom for particles is not the same as freedom for persons. A free electron does not make a free human being. The electron's indeterminacy is random. It does not choose its spin orientation based on preferences, values, or reasons. It simply lands on one outcome or another, governed by quantum probabilities. This is the randomness objection, and it must be taken seriously. If the brain's quantum indeterminacy is merely random, then it provides the raw material for noise but not for choice. The decisions that emerge from a randomly fluctuating brain are no more free than the decisions that emerge from a deterministic brain. They are merely less predictable. A roulette wheel is indeterminate, but no one would call a roulette wheel free. It does not choose where the ball lands. The ball lands where it lands, governed by probabilities, not by intention. If the brain is a quantum roulette wheel, if neural indeterminacy is just biological noise, then quantum mechanics has replaced one form of bondage with another. You are still not free. You are just unpredictable. This objection is powerful because it identifies the real problem. Indeterminacy is a necessary but not sufficient condition for freedom. Freedom requires something more than the absence of determination. It requires agency, the presence of a chooser who selects among possibilities for reasons, not randomly. The challenge for any quantum theory of free will is to explain how quantum indeterminacy can be harnessed by a conscious agent, how the randomness of quantum events can be shaped, directed, and organized by something that has goals, preferences, and values. The challenge, in short, is to explain how the mind can ride the quantum wave without merely being tossed by it. This is where Henry Stapp's quantum mind theory becomes essential. We encountered Stapp in the placebo investigation, where his application of the quantum Zeno effect to the brain provided a mechanism for the mind's influence on neural states. Now, the same framework addresses the free will question, and it does so with remarkable precision. Stapp's framework begins with a distinction that is often overlooked in the free will debate. The distinction between process 1 and process 2 inches, the quantum mechanical formalism established by John von Neumann. Process 2 is the deterministic evolution of the quantum wave function according to the Schrödinger equation. This is the part of quantum mechanics that is fully determined. The wave function evolves predictably, smoothly, without surprises. If process 2 were all there is, the universe would be deterministic at the level of the wave function, though not at the level of individual measurement outcomes. But there is also process 1, the choice of measurement. In every quantum experiment, someone must decide what to measure, which property to probe, which question to ask. This choice is not governed by the Schrödinger equation. It is not determined by process 2. It is, in von Neumann's formalism, an input from outside the deterministic evolution, a free act that selects which aspect of the wave function will be probed, and thereby determines which set of possible outcomes is available. Stapp identifies process 1 with conscious choice. The mind's role, in Stapp's framework, is not to determine the outcome of a quantum measurement that remains probabilistic, governed by the Born rule. The mind's role is to choose which question to ask, which measurement to perform, which neural template to probe. This is a limited freedom. The mind does not control the answer, but it controls the question. And in quantum mechanics, the question matters enormously. Different questions produce different sets of possible outcomes. The choice of which measurement to perform constrains the range of possible results. By choosing which question to ask, by selecting which neural pattern to attend to, the mind shapes the space of possibilities from which the brain's next state will be drawn, and then the quantum Zeno effect amplifies this choice. Once the mind has selected a neural template, a specific pattern of brain activity corresponding to a specific intention, plan, or goal. Repeated attentional focus on that template holds it in place. The quantum Zeno effect prevents the template from decohering into alternative states. Each act of attention is a quantum measurement, a process one event that stabilizes the selected pattern. The more frequently the mind attends to the pattern, the more firmly the pattern is held. And the more firmly the pattern is held, the more effectively it guides the brain's activity and, through the brain, the body's action. In this framework, free will is not the uncaused cause of libertarian philosophy. It is not the power to create choices from nothing. It is something more precise and more elegant. The power to select which question the quantum brain will answer. The brain generates possibilities, neural templates for action, competing plans, alternative responses. These templates are quantum states, existing in superposition until attended to. The mind selects among them by attending to one rather than another. The selected template is stabilized by the Zeno effect. The stabilized template drives behavior, and the behavior, the action, the choice, the decision reflects the mind's selection, not the brain's determination. Consider how this works in practice. You are standing at a crossroads, literally or metaphorically. The brain has generated multiple possible responses. Walk left, walk right, stand still, turn back. These possibilities are represented by neural templates, patterns of brain activity corresponding to each option. In the classical picture, one of these templates is selected by a deterministic cascade of prior causes. In the purely random picture, one is selected by a quantum dice roll. In Stapp's picture, the mind, the conscious agent, selects which template to attend to. The act of attention is a quantum measurement, a process one event. It probes one template rather than another. And the probe template, held in place by repeated attention through the Zeno effect, gains stability, recruits neural resources, and eventually drives action. The mind does not create the options. The brain creates the options. The mind selects among them, and the selection, the choice of where to direct attention, is not determined by the Schrödinger equation. It is not part of process 2. It is process 1, the free input that the quantum formalism requires but does not generate. The mind provides what the equations leave open. This is a subtle but profound form of freedom. It is not omnipotence. The mind cannot create options that the brain does not generate. It cannot force outcomes that quantum probabilities do not allow. It cannot overcome the constraints of neural architecture, genetic predisposition, or developmental history. But within those constraints, within the space of possibilities that the brain offers, the mind selects. It chooses where to look, where to attend, which possibility to stabilize. And this selection, however constrained, is genuine agency. It is the difference between a person who is swept along by their impulses and a person who chooses which impulse to follow. The brain generates both impulses. The mind selects one, and the selection is not determined by any prior physical event. It is a conscious act. This picture dissolves the classical impasse between determinism and randomness. The brain is not deterministic. Quantum indeterminacy ensures that multiple possibilities are genuinely available. The brain is not merely random. The mind's selection of which template to attend to introduces a principle of order that is neither caused by prior physical events nor random. It is a third thing, a conscious act of selection that operates through the quantum mechanical process of measurement. The mind is the observer, the brain is the quantum system, and the act of observation, the choice of what to attend to, is the locus of freedom. David Bohm's implicate order provides a complementary perspective. In Bohm's framework, the explicate order, the visible, measurable, classical world, unfolds from a deeper implicate order in which everything is enfolded into everything else. The mind, in Boehm's view, is not a product of the brain. It is a manifestation of the implicate order, a deeper level of reality that is neither physical nor mental, but both. The mind's freedom, in this framework, is not a freedom from physics. It is a freedom within physics, a freedom that operates at the level of the implicate order, where the distinctions between determined and random, between physical and mental, between cause and effect, dissolve into a deeper unity. Boehm's approach to free will was deeply influenced by his decades-long dialogue with Jiddu Krishnamurti, the Indian philosopher who argued that true freedom is not the freedom to choose between alternatives, but the freedom from the psychological conditioning that constrains choice. Boehm found in Krishnamurti's insight a parallel to his own physics. In the implicate order, the apparent choice between predetermined alternatives, left or right, fight or flee, act or refrain, dissolves into a deeper movement that is neither caused nor random but creative. The implicate order is not a storehouse of fixed possibilities waiting to be selected. It is a generative process, a continuous unfolding of novelty from a source that cannot be described in terms of the categories that apply to the explicate order. Freedom, in this framework, is not selection among pre-existing options. It is participation in a creative process, the emergence of genuinely new responses from a level of reality that transcends the deterministic and random alternatives that exhaust the classical picture. Boehm distinguished between what he called soma-significant and sina-somatic processes. Soma-significant processes are those in which physical events produce, meaning the brain's neural activity producing the experience of thought. Signa-somatic processes are the reverse, meaning producing physical events. The placebo effect is a sina-somatic process, and free will, in Boehm's framework, is a sina-somatic process of the highest order, the mind's meaningful intention, producing physical changes in the brain that result in purposeful action. The meaning is not an epiphenomenon riding passively on top of physical events. The meaning is causally active. It is part of the physics. It is woven into the fabric of the implicate order from which both mind and matter unfold. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff offer yet another route to quantum free will through their Orch-OR theory. Penrose argues that consciousness is not a computation. It is not the execution of an algorithm, however complex. He bases this argument on his 1989 application of Gödel's incompleteness theorems to the philosophy of mind. Developed in his book The Emperor's New Mind and expanded in Shadows of the Mind in 1994, Gödel proved that any sufficiently powerful formal system contains true statements that cannot be proven within the system. These are not obscure mathematical curiosities. They are statements that a human mathematician can see are true by stepping outside the formal system and grasping the truth through understanding rather than proof. Penrose argues that this capacity, the capacity to perceive mathematical truth beyond the reach of any algorithm, demonstrates that human understanding is not algorithmic. No computer, however powerful, can replicate what the human mind does when it grasps a Gödelian truth. This is not a matter of computational power. It is not that computers are too slow or too simple. It is a matter of kind. Algorithmic computation and human understanding are different kinds of processes. And since deterministic computation is algorithmic, since any deterministic physical process can be simulated by a Turing machine, human understanding must involve a non-deterministic process, something that transcends the algorithmic, something that cannot be captured by any classical physical description. Penrose identifies this non-deterministic process with quantum state reduction, the collapse of the wave function, but not the standard collapse triggered by external measurement. Penrose proposes a new form of collapse, objective reduction, in which the wave function collapses spontaneously when the superposition involves states with sufficiently different spacetime geometries. This is a gravitational threshold. When a quantum superposition involves enough mass, enough gravitational self-energy, the superposition becomes unstable and collapses on its own, without external measurement. The collapse is objective, it happens whether or not anyone is watching. Hameroff provides the biological mechanism. Quantum superpositions in neural microtubules, the protein structures inside neurons that are shielded from thermal decoherence by their crystalline lattice geometry and by ordered water molecules surrounding them, undergo objective reduction when the gravitational threshold is reached. Each objective reduction event is a moment of conscious experience, a bing of proto-consciousness, as Hameroff describes it. And these moments are orchestrated, organized by the microtubule network into coherent sequences that constitute the flow of conscious experience. The critical feature of Orch-OR for the free will debate is Penrose's claim that objective reduction is influenced by what he calls Platonic values, mathematical and aesthetic principles embedded in the structure of space-time geometry. The collapse is not random. It is not determined by prior states. It is shaped by something, and the something that shapes it is non-algorithmic, non-computable, and irreducible to classical mechanism. The collapse tends toward mathematically elegant outcomes, toward order, toward coherence, toward what Penrose, borrowing from Plato, calls the good, the true, and the beautiful. This is not mysticism imported into physics. It is Penrose's attempt to explain why human consciousness has the capacity to perceive mathematical truth, a capacity that, he argues, requires a non-algorithmic physical process, sensitive to the deep mathematical structure of reality. If Orch-OR is correct, and it remains highly controversial, with many neuroscientists and physicists rejecting it, then the brain's decisions are neither deterministic nor random. They are shaped by quantum processes in microtubules that are sensitive to Platonic mathematical structures. The mind is free not because it operates outside physics, but because it operates at a level of physics where determinism and randomness are transcended by something deeper. Something that has the character of choice without being an uncaused cause. Something that has the character of order without being deterministic. Something that the traditions lacking the language of quantum mechanics described as the soul, the Atman, the Buddha nature, the Kalb, the innermost agency that chooses, that wills, that participates in the unfolding of reality without being fully controlled by it or fully controlling it. The quantum picture of free will is not settled science. It must be stated clearly. Stapp's framework is speculative. Orch-OR is controversial. Bohm's implicate order is a philosophical interpretation of quantum mechanics, not a testable theory. The experiments that would definitively confirm or refute quantum effects in neural decision-making have not yet been conducted. The mainstream position in neuroscience remains that the brain is, for practical purposes, a classical system, and that free will is either an illusion or a compatibilist redefinition of what freedom means. But the mainstream position is not the only position, and the quantum frameworks, Stapp, Bohm, Penrose, Hameroff offer something that the mainstream position does not: a coherent account of how freedom is possible in a physical universe. Not freedom from physics, freedom within physics. Not freedom as an uncaused cause, freedom as conscious participation in the quantum processes that shape the brain's activity. Not freedom as an illusion. Freedom as a quantum reality, limited, bounded, operating within the constraints of physical law, but genuine, real, irreducible. And now, having assembled the physics, we turn to the traditions. Because the traditions have been describing this kind of freedom not absolute, not unlimited, not uncaused, but real, participatory, and meaningful for thousands of years. They did not use the language of quantum mechanics. They used the language of theology, philosophy, and contemplative experience. But the structure of what they described, the relationship between human agency and cosmic order, between individual will and universal law, between the chooser and the context in which choices are made, maps onto the quantum picture with a precision that demands examination. The next part will enter the traditions: Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and map their deepest insights about free will against the quantum framework we have assembled. And the convergence, as we will see, is not superficial. It is structural. It is precise. And it has been waiting patiently for millennia for a physics capable of expressing what the contemplative masters always knew, because the traditions did not describe freedom as the absence of constraint. They described it as participation. The Christian tradition describes freedom as cooperation with divine grace synergy. In the Orthodox formulation, not autonomy from God, but partnership with God. The Buddhist tradition describes freedom as the cessation of reactive patterns, not the ability to do anything, but the ability to respond rather than react, to choose rather than be driven. The Hindu tradition describes freedom as alignment with Dharma, acting in harmony with the cosmic order, not in defiance of it. The Islamic tradition describes freedom as submission to the divine will, a paradox in which true freedom is found not in resistance, but in surrender to a purpose larger than the individual self. These descriptions share a common structure. Freedom is not opposed to order. Freedom operates within order. Freedom is the capacity to participate in the cosmic process consciously, intentionally, meaningfully, without either controlling it or being controlled by it. This is precisely the structure that the quantum frameworks describe. The mind does not control the quantum outcomes. It does not determine the brain's activity from outside physics, but it participates through the choice of measurement, through the Zeno stabilization of selected templates, through the creative unfolding of the implicate order in a process that is neither determined nor random. The traditions and the physics converge on a picture of freedom that is more sophisticated, more nuanced, and more beautiful than either determinism or libertarianism, a picture in which you are neither a puppet nor a god, but something far more interesting, a participant, a co-creator, a conscious agent operating within a reality that is itself conscious, meaningful, and responsive to your attention. The free will debate did not begin with Libet. It did not begin with neuroscience. It began the moment the first human being looked at their own hands and asked, "Did I choose to move them?" And the traditions, every major tradition in human history, have been wrestling with this question with a sophistication and a depth that the modern scientific debate has not yet matched. The neuroscientists debate whether the brain decides before consciousness. The traditions debate something deeper. What kind of being are you, that the question even makes sense? What is the relationship between the chooser and the cosmos, between the agent and the ground from which agency arises, between the part that wills and the whole that contains it? Christianity has the longest continuous debate about free will in the Western intellectual tradition, a debate that has shaped law, ethics, theology, and politics for 2,000 years. And the debate begins not with an abstract philosophical argument, but with a concrete human experience, the experience of Paul writing to the Romans in the 1st century, in what may be the most honest statement about the human condition ever committed to writing. "I do not do the good I want to do," Paul wrote, "but the evil I do not want to do this I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it." This is not theology. This is phenomenology, a precise description of the experience of conflicted will. Paul experiences two wills within himself. One wants the good, the other does the evil. And the one that acts, the one that determines behavior, is not the one Paul identifies with. Something is making decisions that the conscious self does not endorse. Libet could not have said it better. The brain, or in Paul's language, sin living in me, initiates actions that the conscious self does not choose. The readiness potential fires before the decision, the impulse arises before the will, and the conscious self, Paul's I, experiences this as a bewildering split, wanting one thing and doing another, intending the good and executing the evil, willing and not willing simultaneously. Augustine of Hippo, writing in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, transformed Paul's personal confession into a systematic theology. Augustine's own experience was the starting point. In the Confessions, he describes years of knowing the truth of Christianity and being unable to act on it. He wanted to convert. He believed he should convert. He understood the arguments. And yet his will would not move. The mind commands the body and is immediately obeyed, Augustine wrote. The mind commands the mind and meets resistance. The will is divided against itself. It is not simply a matter of ignorance. Augustine knew what was right. It is not simply a matter of weakness. Augustine had the physical capacity to act. It is a fracture in the will itself, a condition in which the will simultaneously wills and does not will, chooses and refuses, moves and is frozen. Augustine's solution was grace, the doctrine that the human will is incapable, on its own, of choosing the good consistently. The will is fallen, it is damaged, it tends towards self-destruction, and the only remedy is divine intervention grace, the unmerited gift of God that heals the will, redirects it, and empowers it to choose what it could not choose on its own. In Augustine's framework, freedom is not the ability to choose between good and evil. True freedom is the ability to choose the good, an ability that the fallen will has lost and that only grace can restore. Augustine developed this position partly in response to Pelagius, a British monk who argued, human beings have the natural capacity to choose the good without divine assistance. Pelagius taught that Adam's sin damaged only Adam, not the entire human race. Every person is born with a clean slate and a fully functional will. Grace is helpful, but not necessary. The will, on its own, can choose virtue. The debate between Augustine and Pelagius fought through letters, treatises, church councils, and papal interventions across the early 5th century is the founding conflict of the Western free will debate, and it maps, with remarkable precision, onto the modern neuroscience debate. Pelagius is the libertarian, the will is fully free, fully capable, fully autonomous. Augustine is the soft determinist, the will exists, but is compromised, unable to function properly without external assistance. And the Church sided with Augustine at the Council of Carthage in 418, and again at the Council of Orange in 529. The human will is real but fallen. Freedom exists, but is damaged. Choice is genuine, but insufficient without grace. The parallel with the quantum picture is striking. The quantum mind can choose. Process one is real. But the choice is constrained by the templates the brain generates, by the strength of habitual patterns, by the conditioning that narrows the range of available options. The mind can select, but it cannot select from an unlimited menu. Grace, in this framework, might correspond to the expansion of the quantum superposition, the widening of the range of available templates through practices that loosen the grip of conditioning and open the mind to possibilities that the habitual brain has excluded. Meditation expands the menu. Prayer expands the menu. Contemplative practice expands the menu, and the expanded menu, the wider superposition of possibilities, gives process one more to choose from, more freedom, more options, more genuine agency. This is a remarkable parallel to the quantum picture. In Stapp's framework, The brain generates competing neural templates, some aligned with the person's values and goals, others driven by impulse, habit, and conditioning. The conscious mind selects among them through process 1 the choice of which template to attend to. But the selection is not guaranteed. The mind can choose the wrong template. It can be pulled by the strongest impulse rather than the wisest intention. It can fail to exercise its veto. The capacity for choice exists, but the capacity must be activated, trained, and strengthened. It does not operate automatically. Augustine's grace and Stapp's process 1 share a structural feature. Both describe a capacity for directed choice that exists in principle, but that must be activated by something grace in Augustine's framework. Conscious attention in Stapp's that is not itself a product of the deterministic neural chain. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Dominican philosopher who synthesized Christian theology with Aristotelian philosophy, addressed the free will question with the systematic precision that characterizes all his work. Aquinas distinguished between the intellect and the will. The intellect perceives the good, it understands what is true, what is valuable, what is worth pursuing. The will moves toward the good that the intellect perceives, but the will is not compelled by the intellect's perception. It can choose to act on the intellect's judgment or to ignore it. It can be moved by passion rather than reason, by habit rather than reflection, by desire rather than wisdom. The freedom of the will, for Aquinas, consists precisely in this capacity to move toward or away from the good that the intellect presents. The intellect presents options. The will selects. This is structurally identical to Stapp's picture. The brain generates neural templates, Aquinas' intellect presenting options, and the conscious mind selects among them, Aquinas' will, moving toward the perceived good. Aquinas also addressed the relationship between divine providence and human freedom, the question that has tormented Christian theology for 2 millennia. How can human beings be free if God governs all events? Aquinas' answer is subtle and has no parallel in the determinist neuroscience literature. God, Aquinas argued, is not a cause among causes. God is the ground of causation itself. God does not compete with human freedom the way one billiard ball competes with another. God enables human freedom. God is the condition under which free choice is possible, not the constraint that prevents it. This is analogous to the relationship between quantum mechanics and the observer in Stapp's framework. The Schrödinger equation does not compete with process 1. It provides the field of possibilities from which process 1 selects. The law does not constrain the choice. The law creates the space within which choice operates. The Orthodox Christian tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy, developed the concept of synergy, the cooperation between divine grace and human will. In the Orthodox framework, neither grace alone nor will alone is sufficient for salvation or for the fullest expression of human freedom. Grace opens possibilities that the will cannot create on its own. The will responds to grace, accepting, cooperating, aligning itself with the divine direction. The process is mutual, reciprocal, and genuinely collaborative. The human being is not a puppet moved by grace. The human being is a partner, an agent, who participates in a process larger than itself, contributing something that grace alone does not provide: consent. The willingness to be transformed. Maximus the Confessor, the 7th century Byzantine theologian, developed the most sophisticated orthodox account of free will. Maximus distinguished between the natural will and the gnomic will. The natural will is the will as God created it, oriented toward the good, aligned with divine purpose, free in the truest sense, because it acts in accordance with the nature God gave it. The gnomic will is the will as it operates in fallen human beings, uncertain, deliberative, torn between options, capable of choosing wrongly. The gnomic will is what Libet measured: the hesitant, conflicted, impulsive process of deciding between alternatives. The natural will is something deeper, the will aligned with its own deepest nature, choosing the good not through deliberation but through the direct perception of what is right. The goal of the spiritual life, for Maximus, is the transformation of the gnomic will into the natural will, the healing of the divided will, the restoration of the capacity for clear, undivided, wholehearted choice. Buddhism approaches free will through an entirely different philosophical vocabulary and arrives at insights that converge with the Christian analysis with extraordinary precision. The Buddhist tradition does not use the term free will. It uses the term cittana, intention, volition, the directing of the mind. Cittana is the engine of karma. The Buddha said explicitly, "It is intention that I call karma, not action alone, not thought alone. Intention, the deliberate, conscious, directed quality of mental activity that shapes the character of an action and determines its karmic consequence." This is a critical distinction. Karma is not fate. It is not predestination. It is not the mechanical unfolding of prior causes. Karma is the principle that intentional actions produce consequences, and that the quality of the intention determines the quality of the consequence. A harmful action performed with harmful intent produces harmful consequences. A harmful action performed with compassionate intent, a surgeon cutting tissue to save a life, produces different consequences. The intention matters. The consciousness with which the action is performed matters. And intention, in the Buddhist framework, is something that can be trained, refined, and redirected. The entire Buddhist path, the Eightfold Path of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, is a technology for training intention. You cannot train what is not free. The existence of the path presupposes the capacity to walk it. The Abhidharma, the Buddhist philosophical psychology, maps the mind's operation with extraordinary precision. It identifies specific mental factors that arise with each moment of consciousness. Factors like attention, contact, feeling, perception, and volition. Volition cittana is present in every conscious moment. It is the directional quality of consciousness, the factor that orients the mind toward or away from objects, that shapes the character of experience, that determines how the mind responds to what it encounters. And the Abhidharma teaches that cittana can be cultivated. Through meditation, the practitioner develops the capacity to notice the arising of volition before it produces action. This noticing, this gap between impulse and response, is the space of freedom. It is Libet's veto, expressed in Buddhist terms. The impulse arises, the meditator notices it, and the meditator chooses not whether the impulse arises, that is conditioned, not free, but how to respond to the impulse once it has arisen. Modern neuroscience confirms this capacity. Antoine Lutz and Richard Davidson, working with long-term Buddhist meditators at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, demonstrated that experienced meditators show enhanced activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex during decision-making tasks, the brain region most associated with executive control, deliberate choice, and the inhibition of impulsive responses. The meditators' brains showed a stronger capacity to override automatic responses, a neural veto that is more robust, more reliable, and more frequently exercised than in non-meditators. Meditation does not create free will from nothing. It strengthens the neural infrastructure that supports the exercise of free will. It trains the veto. It expands the gap between impulse and response. It makes freedom more accessible by making the brain more responsive to conscious direction. Tanya Singer at the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences extended this work by showing that different types of meditation produce different neural changes. Attention-based meditation focused on a single object, like the breath, strengthens the prefrontal cortex and enhances attentional control. Compassion-based meditation focused on generating loving kindness toward others strengthens the insula and enhances empathic accuracy. The type of freedom you develop depends on the type of practice you engage in. The Buddhist path is not a single practice. It is a curriculum, a systematic program for developing multiple dimensions of volitional capacity. Attention, compassion, equanimity, wisdom. Each dimension corresponds to a different neural system. Each system can be trained, and the training expands the space of freedom by expanding the range of responses the practitioner can access. Zen Buddhism makes this practical with radical directness. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." The beginner's mind, Shoshin, is the mind that has not foreclosed its options, that has not collapsed the superposition of possibilities into a single determined outcome. The expert's mind is the deterministic mind, trained, conditioned, efficient, but rigid. The Zen practice of Zazen sitting meditation is designed to restore beginner's mind, to open the mind to the full range of possibilities that the conditioned mind has excluded, to expand the space of freedom by dismantling the habits, assumptions, and reactive patterns that constrain choice. This is precisely what the quantum picture describes. The deterministic brain is the brain in which neural patterns have become so entrenched through conditioning, through repetition, through habit that the range of available templates has narrowed to a few well-worn paths. The free mind is the mind that can access a wider range of templates, a wider superposition of possibilities, because meditation has loosened the grip of habitual patterns and expanded the space within which process one can operate. The Hindu tradition adds a cosmological dimension through the Bhagavad Gita, arguably the deepest treatment of free will in world literature. Arjuna's dilemma on the battlefield of Kurukshetra is not merely a military decision, it is an existential crisis. Arjuna is a warrior. His dharma, his cosmic duty is to fight, but his enemies are his relatives, his teachers, his friends. He is paralyzed by the conflict between duty and compassion, between cosmic order and personal feeling, between what he must do and what he cannot bear to do. Krishna's response to Arjuna is not a command, it is an illumination. Krishna does not tell Arjuna what to choose, he transforms Arjuna's understanding of what choice means. You have the right to action alone, never to its fruits, Krishna says. Let not the fruits of action be your motive, nor let your attachment be to inaction. This is nishkama karma, desireless action, the central teaching of the Gita. Act, but do not be attached to the outcome. Choose, but do not be enslaved by the consequences. Perform your duty, but do not identify with the results. Krishna then reveals to Arjuna the three gunas, the three qualities that condition all action. Sattva is clarity, harmony, wisdom. Rajas is passion, energy, restlessness. Tamas is inertia, ignorance, darkness. Every human action is influenced by the gunas, and the proportions vary from moment to moment, from person to person, from lifetime to lifetime. The gunas are the conditioning that the Buddhist tradition calls sankhara, and that neuroscience calls habitual neural patterns. They are the templates that the brain generates, the options from which the will must choose. And the Gita's prescription, the practice of yoga, meditation, devotion, and selfless action, is designed to shift the balance of the gunas towards sattva, to increase clarity, to expand the range of wise options available to the will, to make freedom not just theoretically possible but practically accessible. The Gita's teaching on free will is thus neither deterministic nor libertarian. The gunas condition, karma constrains, dharma directs, but within these constraints, the self, the Atman, chooses. And the quality of the choice depends on the quality of the chooser's consciousness. A tamasic consciousness, dull, ignorant, reactive, chooses poorly because it cannot see clearly. A rajasic consciousness, agitated, driven, passionate, chooses impulsively because it cannot be still. A sattvic consciousness, clear, calm, wise, chooses well because it perceives the options accurately and responds rather than reacts. The spiritual path does not create freedom. It clears the obstacles to freedom. It polishes the lens through which the chooser sees. This is not determinism. Arjuna genuinely chooses. And it is not libertarian free will. Arjuna's choice is not unconstrained. It operates within the framework of dharma, karma, and cosmic order. It is the third option, the option that quantum mechanics also describes. The agent participates in a process that exceeds the agent's control. The agent does not determine outcomes, quantum probabilities remain irreducibly uncertain, but the agent's participation is real, meaningful, and essential. Without Arjuna's choice, the cosmic order is incomplete. Without the conscious observer's process one input, the quantum formalism is incomplete. The chooser and the cosmos need each other. The Islamic tradition addresses free will through the creative tension between two Quranic principles that appear contradictory and yet are held together by every major school of Islamic thought. The first, Allah does not change the condition of a people unless they change what is in themselves. This is a direct affirmation of human agency. You must act, you must change, you must choose, and your choice has real consequences. The second, you cannot will unless Allah wills. This is a direct affirmation of divine sovereignty. Nothing happens outside the divine will, including your own willing. The Ash'ari school, the dominant theological school in Sunni Islam, resolved this tension through the concept of kasb, or acquisition. God creates all actions, including human actions. But the human being acquires the action through intention and choice. The action is God's creation. The intention is the human's contribution. Both are necessary. Neither is sufficient alone. This is synergy in Islamic terms, a picture in which human freedom is real, but operates within a divine framework that encompasses it without negating it. The Mu'tazile school, the great rationalist movement in early Islamic theology, took the opposite position. The Mu'tazilites argued that human beings must be genuinely free, because without genuine freedom, divine justice is meaningless. If God determines all actions, then God determines sin. If God determines sin, then God punishes people for actions they could not have avoided. And a God who punishes the unfree is not just. Therefore, the Mu'tazilites argued, human beings must be the true authors of their actions, free in the fullest sense, responsible in the fullest sense, capable of choosing otherwise in the fullest sense. The Mu'tazile-Ash'ari debate mirrors the libertarian compatibilist debate in Western philosophy with striking precision, and both debates remain unresolved because both are grappling with the same fundamental tension between the reality of choice and the reality of cosmic order. Rumi, the 13th century Sufi poet and mystic, addressed the free will question with the directness and paradox that characterize all his teaching. You have a duty to perform, Rumi wrote. Do anything else, do any number of things, occupy your time fully, and yet, if you do not do this task, all your time will have been wasted. The task Rumi describes is the task of consciousness, the task of waking up, of becoming aware, of exercising the capacity for choice that distinguishes the conscious being from the automaton. Rumi does not argue for or against free will. He assumes it and commands its exercise. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? The door is freedom. The prison is unconsciousness, the habitual, reactive, conditioned mode of existence in which choices are made for you by impulse, desire, and conditioning rather than by you through awareness, intention, and love. The Sufi tradition as a whole treats free will not as a philosophical problem to be solved, but as a spiritual capacity to be developed. The nafs, the lower self, the ego, the bundle of desires and impulses is the deterministic machine. It reacts, it craves, it avoids, it follows the strongest stimulus. But the ruh, the spirit, has the capacity to transcend the nafs. Through dhikr, through prayer, through the practices of the Sufi path, the practitioner strengthens the ruh's authority over the nafs. Freedom, in the Sufi framework, is not a given. It is an achievement. You are born in bondage to your impulses, your conditioning, your unconscious patterns, and you become free through practice, through discipline, through the systematic cultivation of awareness. Freedom is not the starting point. Freedom is the destination. This is perhaps the most important insight that the traditions collectively offer to the free will debate. The neuroscientists ask, "Are you free?" And they design experiments to answer the question. As a matter of fact, either you are or you are not. Either the brain decides before consciousness or it does not. But the traditions ask a different question. How free are you? And their answer is, it depends. It depends on how much you have practiced, how much you have cultivated awareness, how much you have trained the capacity for conscious choice, how much you have expanded the space between impulse and response. Freedom is not a binary present or absent, real or illusory. Freedom is a spectrum, and your position on the spectrum is not fixed. It can change through practice, through effort, through the deliberate, sustained, disciplined cultivation of the capacity to choose. Al-Ghazali, whom we encountered in the Heart and Placebo investigations, addressed free will with characteristic depth. He argued that the human being stands between two forces, the nafs, the lower self, driven by desire and impulse, and the ruh, the spirit, oriented toward God and truth. The nafs generates impulses, the ruh generates aspirations, and between them stands the qalb, the heart which must choose which to follow. The heart is the locus of freedom, not the brain, not the rational mind. The heart, the organ of spiritual perception, the mirror that reflects divine truth when polished. Freedom, for Ghazali, is a cardiac function. It is the heart's capacity to turn toward the ruh rather than the nafs, toward wisdom rather than impulse, toward the divine rather than the animal. And this capacity, like the capacity for cardiac coherence that HeartMath measures, must be cultivated through practice, through dhikr, through prayer, through the systematic polishing of the heart's mirror until it reflects clearly enough to see which direction to turn. The convergence across traditions is structural. Christianity describes a divided will, healed by grace, a capacity for choice that is real but must be activated. Buddhism describes an intention that can be trained, a volitional capacity that expands through meditation. Hinduism describes choice within cosmic order, an agent who participates in a process without controlling it. Islam describes human intention within divine creation, an acquisition of action that is real but encompassed by a larger will. 4 traditions, 4 vocabularies. 1 structure, freedom is real, limited, and participatory. It is not absolute. It is not illusory. It is the capacity of a conscious agent to participate meaningfully, intentionally, responsibly, in a process that exceeds the agent's control. This is the quantum picture. Precisely, the conscious mind does not create possibilities from nothing, the brain generates them. The conscious mind does not determine outcomes with certainty, quantum probabilities remain. But the conscious mind participates through process 1 selection, through Zeno stabilization, through the creative unfolding of the implicate order, in shaping which possibilities become actual. The agent's freedom is real, the agent's freedom is bounded, and the agent's freedom is meaningful because without it, the quantum formalism is incomplete, and the tradition's prescriptions for spiritual practice are incoherent, and the traditions add something that the quantum formalism does not, the insight that freedom is developmental. You are not born maximally free. You are born with the capacity for freedom, the capacity to exercise. Process 1, to select among templates, to stabilize chosen patterns through attention. But the capacity must be trained. Augustine prescribes prayer and the reception of grace. The Buddhist path prescribes meditation and the cultivation of mindfulness. The Hindu path prescribes yoga, devotion, and selfless action. The Sufi path prescribes dhikr, remembrance, and the polishing of the heart. And neuroscience confirms that these practices work, that meditation strengthens the prefrontal cortex, enhances the neural veto, expands the gap between impulse and response, and produces measurable increases in the capacity for deliberate, conscious, directed choice. You can become freer. This is the tradition's most important claim. Freedom is not a fixed property of the universe, possessed or not possessed, real or illusory. Freedom is a capacity that can be developed. And the practices that develop it, prayer, meditation, contemplation, ethical discipline, the systematic cultivation of awareness, are not mere spiritual exercises. They are technologies for expanding the space within which quantum free will operates. They are tools for making freedom real. The final part of this investigation will put it all together: the neuroscience, the quantum mechanics, the traditions, and the question that every human being must ultimately answer, not theoretically, but existentially, not in the laboratory, but in life. Are you free? And if so, what will you do with your freedom? 4 investigations, 4 methods, and a single question that has haunted every human being who has ever paused long enough to ask it. Are you free? The neuroscience says, probably not. Libet's readiness, potential, fires before you decide. Haynes's fMRI decodes your choice 7 seconds before you make it. Wegner's experiments demonstrate that the feeling of willing can be manufactured and detached from actual causation. Harris argues that you cannot even choose your next thought. It will arrive unbidden from causes you did not select. The brain decides. Consciousness narrates. And the narrative, the feeling of being the author of your own actions, is a story the brain tells itself, a useful fiction. A convenient lie. The quantum mechanics says, it is more complicated than that. The Conway-Kochen Free Will Theorem proves that if experimenters are free to choose their measurements, then particles are free too, and if particles are determined, then experimenters are determined too. Freedom and determination are all or nothing. Superdeterminism, the last refuge of complete determination, requires a cosmic conspiracy of implausible precision and cannot be tested even in principle. Stapp's quantum Zeno effect provides a mechanism by which conscious attention could stabilize specific brain states, selecting among quantum possibilities without either causing them from nothing or merely observing them passively. Penrose and Hameroff propose that quantum processes in neural microtubules generate moments of conscious experience that are neither determined nor random, but influenced by the deep mathematical structure of reality. And Bohm's implicate order describes a level of reality in which the distinctions between determined and random, between caused and uncaused, between free and bound, dissolve into a deeper unity from which both mind and matter unfold. The traditions say, you are neither a puppet nor a god. You are a participant. Christianity describes a will that is real but fallen, capable of choice. but in need of grace to choose well. Buddhism describes an intention that can be trained, a volitional capacity that expands through practice from reactive automation to responsive awareness. Hinduism describes choice within cosmic order, an agent who acts within the framework of dharma and karma, constrained but not determined, responsible but not omnipotent. Islam describes human will within divine sovereignty, an acquisition of action that is genuinely the agent's own, while remaining encompassed by a larger will. And every tradition prescribes the same remedy for the unfreedom that characterizes ordinary human existence: practice, discipline, the deliberate, sustained, systematic cultivation of awareness, attention, and the capacity for conscious choice. 3 lines of evidence, 3 methods, and they converge not on a simple answer, but on a picture of freedom that is more nuanced, more sophisticated, and more true to human experience than either the determinist denial or the libertarian's assertion. The convergence is worth stating with precision because its structure reveals something that no single line of evidence could reveal on its own. The neuroscience reveals the problem. The brain initiates before consciousness decides. But it also reveals the solution's infrastructure. The prefrontal cortex can override impulses, meditation strengthens the neural veto, and the gap between impulse and response, Scherger's threshold model, is expandable through practice. The neuroscience does not prove that you are a puppet. It proves that you could be a puppet if you do not exercise the capacity for conscious override that the brain provides. The quantum mechanics reveals the possibility. The deterministic chain is broken at the fundamental level. Quantum indeterminacy is real. The Conway-Kochen theorem links particle freedom to experimenter freedom, and the quantum Zeno effect provides a mechanism by which conscious attention could influence which quantum possibilities become actual. The quantum mechanics does not prove that you are free. It proves that freedom is physically possible, that the laws of nature do not exclude it, as classical determinism appeared to. The traditions reveal the practice. Freedom is not given, it is developed. Every tradition prescribes specific practices: prayer, meditation, ethical discipline, contemplation, designed to expand the capacity for conscious choice. And the neuroscience confirms that these practices work. They strengthen the neural infrastructure of deliberate decision-making, widen the gap between impulse and response, and produce measurable changes in the brain regions associated with executive control. 3 contributions, 3 pieces of a single puzzle. The neuroscience identifies the challenge. The quantum mechanics provides the physics. The traditions provide the technology. And together, they describe a form of freedom that is neither the determinist's illusion nor the libertarian's fantasy, but something more interesting, more demanding, and more true. Let us assemble the picture. You are not fully determined. The deterministic case rests on classical physics, and classical physics has been superseded. The brain is a quantum system. Its fundamental components obey quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is irreducibly indeterminate. Bell's theorem proved it. Aspect measured it. The Nobel Committee certified it. The deterministic chain that Laplace imagined every event caused by the prior event, all the way back to the Big Bang, is broken at the quantum level. Not by a gap in our knowledge, by a feature of reality. The universe is not a clockwork mechanism. It is a quantum system in which genuine novelty is possible, genuine indeterminacy is real, and the future is not contained in the past. You are not merely random. The indeterminacy of quantum mechanics does not mean that your decisions are coin flips. Stapp's framework provides a mechanism, the quantum Zeno effect, by which conscious attention can harness quantum indeterminacy and direct it towards specific outcomes. The mind does not roll dice. The mind selects questions. It chooses which neural template to attend to. It stabilizes the chosen template through repeated observation, and the stabilized template guides behavior not deterministically, not randomly, but through a process of conscious participation that is neither caused by prior events nor independent of them. The mind operates within the quantum field of possibilities that the brain generates, constrained by the options available, but free to select among them. You are not absolutely free. The libertarian dream, the uncaused cause, the will that creates choices from nothing, the self that exists outside the causal order and intervenes in it from beyond, is not supported by any physics, any neuroscience, or any tradition. Every tradition we examine describes freedom as bounded. Augustine's will needs grace. The Buddhist's intention operates within the web of dependent origination. Arjuna's choice operates within Dharma. The Muslim's will operates within divine sovereignty. And the quantum mind's process one operates within the constraints of the brain's neural architecture, the templates it generates, and the quantum probabilities that govern outcomes. You are not free in the sense of being unconstrained. You are free in the sense of being a genuine participant, an agent whose participation makes a difference, whose choices are real, and whose attention shapes the landscape of possibility within which the future unfolds. You are a participant. This is the convergent conclusion, not a puppet, not a god, not a machine, not a ghost in a machine. A participant, a conscious agent, embedded in a quantum universe, operating within a web of constraint and possibility, capable of directing attention, selecting among options, stabilizing chosen patterns, and thereby influencing, not determining, not controlling, but genuinely influencing the trajectory of events. But intellectual honesty requires confronting the objections one final time. The first objection is the gap objection. Even if the quantum frameworks are correct, even if Stapp, Bohm, and Penrose Hameroff are right, there remains an enormous gap between quantum effects at the molecular level and conscious decisions at the level of human experience. Ion channels may involve quantum tunneling. Microtubules may sustain quantum superpositions. But how does the quantum indeterminacy of an ion channel translate into the conscious experience of choosing between right and wrong? How does the Zeno stabilization of a neural template translate into the felt sense of making a moral decision? The gap is real. The bridge between quantum physics and conscious experience has not been built, and until it is, the quantum theories of free will remain promissory frameworks that could explain free will if their assumptions are confirmed, but that have not yet been confirmed. This objection is valid and must be acknowledged without evasion. We do not yet have a complete theory of how quantum effects in the brain produce conscious experience. We do not yet have the experimental tools to measure quantum coherence in a living, deciding human brain in real time. The quantum frameworks are hypotheses, well formulated, mathematically rigorous, consistent with known physics, but hypotheses nonetheless. The honest position is, the quantum picture of free will is possible, coherent, and consistent with the evidence, but it is not proven. The second objection is the relevance objection. Even if quantum effects operate in the brain, even if the mind can select among quantum possibilities through process one, does this matter for the decisions that define human life? The decisions that matter, whether to forgive, whether to sacrifice, whether to love, whether to persist in the face of suffering, are not quantum events. They are complex, multi-layered, emotionally charged processes involving memory, values, relationships, and identity. Quantum indeterminacy at the ion channel level seems absurdly remote from the lived experience of moral choice. The quantum theory of free will may be solving the wrong problem, addressing the physics of indeterminacy, when the real problem is the psychology of agency. This objection has force. but it underestimates the relationship between scales. Complex systems amplify small-scale effects. Weather systems amplify molecular fluctuations into hurricanes. Neural networks amplify synaptic variations into thoughts. The brain is a complex system, one of the most complex systems in the known universe, and complex systems are precisely the kinds of systems in which quantum-level effects can be amplified to macroscopic significance. Scherger's model of the readiness potential, which describes decision initiation as a threshold-crossing event driven by stochastic neural fluctuations, demonstrates exactly this kind of amplification. Small-scale noise is amplified by the neural network into large-scale decisions. If the small-scale noise includes a quantum component and the physics of ion channels suggests that it does, then quantum effects are not remote from moral choice. They are one of the sources of the variability from which moral choice emerges. The third objection is the tradition objection. The tradition's descriptions of free will are beautiful, but they are not evidence. They are testimonies, the reports of contemplative practitioners who devoted their lives to investigating the nature of consciousness. Their convergence is suggestive, but not probative. They could all be wrong. They could all be describing psychological experiences, shifts in attention, changes in emotional state, subjective feelings of freedom that have no connection to quantum mechanics or to the actual physics of the brain. The convergence between the traditions and the quantum picture could be a coincidence of language rather than a convergence of reality. This objection is valid in principle. Convergence is not proof. But the convergence we have documented is not casual or superficial. It is structural. The traditions describe freedom as participatory, not absolute, not illusory, but real, within constraints. The quantum picture describes freedom as participatory, process, one selection within the constraints of quantum probabilities. The traditions describe freedom as developmental, expandable through practice. The neuroscience confirms that contemplative practice strengthens the neural infrastructure of conscious choice. The traditions describe freedom as operating through attention, the direction of the mind, toward specific objects, intentions, and outcomes. The quantum Zeno effect describes exactly this mechanism, the stabilization of quantum states through repeated observation. The convergence is not one parallel. It is a systematic alignment across multiple dimensions, structure, mechanism, development, practice, and outcome. This kind of multi-dimensional convergence is unlikely to be coincidental. Now let us trace the connections to the investigations we have conducted before. The observer effect, the foundational discovery of quantum mechanics is the foundation of quantum free will. The observer does not passively record a pre-existing reality. The observer participates in creating reality. Every Bell test, every double-slit experiment, every quantum measurement demonstrates this. The free will question is the observer effect applied to the brain. Does the conscious observer participate in determining the brain's activity? Stapp says yes, through process 1. Penrose says yes, through objective reduction. The traditions say yes, through prayer, meditation, and the deliberate direction of attention. The observer effect is not confined to physics laboratories. It operates in every conscious moment. It operates in you. The synchronicity investigation revealed that events can be connected by meaning rather than by mechanism, that causal correlations exist between inner experience and outer events. Free will may be another expression of this acausal connection. The conscious mind's influence on the brain, if it operates through process 1, through the quantum Zeno effect, through the selection of measurement rather than the determination of outcome, is acausal in the classical sense. No force is transmitted from mind to brain. No energy is exchanged. No signal travels from the conscious observer to the neural substrate, and yet the correlation is real. The mind attends and the brain responds. This is synchronicity within the body, meaningful connection without mechanism. The same causal principle that connects distant events in the world connects the mind to the brain within the skull. The placebo investigation demonstrated that the mind can heal the body, that belief, expectation, and meaning produce measurable biological change. Free will is the broader expression of the same capacity. If the mind can produce endorphins from expectation, dopamine from belief, and gene expression changes from meditation, then the mind has causal power over the body. And if the mind has causal power, then the mind is not an epiphenomenon. It is not a passive byproduct of brain activity. It is an agent whose agency extends from neurochemistry to behavior, from molecular events to moral choices. The placebo effect is freedom operating at the cellular level. Free will is freedom operating at the level of action. The heart investigation revealed that the heart, not the brain, may be the primary organ of intuitive perception and conscious direction. The heart responds to future events before the brain does. The heart's coherent rhythm entrains and enhances brain function. The traditions locate free will in the heart, Ghazali's Kalb choosing between nafs and ruh, the Christian heart as the seat of moral decision, the Buddhist hridaya as the locus of compassionate intention. If the heart is the organ through which the mind exercises its quantum influence on the body, if cardiac coherence is the physiological state that optimizes process 1 selection, then the tradition's insistence that freedom is a cardiac function rather than a cerebral function takes on new meaning. You do not choose with your brain, you choose with your heart. And the quality of your choices depends on the coherence of your heart. The biological antenna investigation proposed that the body is a receiver tuned to information from beyond the 5 senses. If the mind's freedom operates through the quantum Zeno effect, if it involves the selection of quantum measurements and the stabilization of selected brain states, then the mind may be receiving information from the quantum vacuum, from the implicate order, from sources that the deterministic brain cannot access. The free choice may not be arbitrary. It may be informed by information that arrives through quantum channels, information about the future, about distant events, about the deep structure of reality. The traditions describe this as divine guidance, as intuition, as the voice of the heart, as the Tao's silent instruction. The quantum picture provides a mechanism, speculative but coherent, by which such guidance could arrive. The retrocausality investigation, the Future Self series, demonstrated that the future can influence the present. If retrocausality operates in the brain, if future states of the brain can reach backward and influence present neural activity, then the free choice made now may be informed by its own future consequences. The person who chooses wisely may be choosing wisely, because the wisdom of the future is flowing backward through the quantum correlations of the block universe, informing the present choice with knowledge of outcomes that have not yet occurred. This is not determinism. The future does not determine the present, but the future participates in shaping the present just as the present participates in shaping the future. Time is not a one-way street. Influence flows in both directions, and free will, operating at the intersection of past influence and future influence, may have access to information that a purely present moment, forward-flowing model of choice cannot accommodate. The evolution series explored whether evolution operates as a quantum algorithm, and if so, whether the creative intelligence visible in biological adaptation is related to the creative intelligence of conscious choice. Both involve the selection of possibilities from a field of quantum alternatives. Both produce outcomes that are neither random nor determined, but adaptive, fitted to the context, responsive to the environment, creative in their novelty. Free will may be the latest expression of the same evolutionary creativity that produced eyes from light-sensitive cells, wings from forelimbs, and consciousness from neural tissue. The cosmos has been making choices, selecting among quantum possibilities, amplifying adaptive patterns, creating novelty from indeterminacy for 14 billion years. You are the cosmos's latest and most sophisticated experiment in choosing. The grief series, the quantum geometry of grief, connects to free will through the question of moral responsibility. If you are genuinely free, if your choices are real and consequential, then your choices regarding the people you love carry a weight that determinism removes. The choice to be present with a dying parent, the choice to forgive a friend who has wronged you, the choice to continue loving when love is difficult. These choices matter not just psychologically but ontologically, because they are moments when a conscious agent exercises genuine freedom in the face of suffering. If determinism is true, these choices are illusions. The brain would have done the same thing regardless, and the feeling of choosing is a confabulation. But if the quantum picture is correct, if your attention genuinely shapes which possibilities become actual, then the choice to love in the face of loss is one of the most significant events in the universe. A free agent, exercising genuine freedom, participating in the quantum structure of reality through the deliberate direction of attention toward compassion rather than bitterness, toward presence rather than retreat, toward love rather than fear. Every thread connects. Every investigation points to the same picture. You are free, not absolutely, not unconditionally, not in the way that libertarian philosophy imagines, but genuinely, really, in a way that matters, in a way that makes your choices meaningful, your actions consequential, and your life your specific, unrepeatable, singular life, something more than the inevitable output of a deterministic machine or the random twitching of a quantum noise generator. You are a participant, in the deepest sense, in the quantum sense, in the sense that the traditions have been trying to communicate for 4,000 years and that quantum mechanics has been demonstrating for a century. The universe is not watching you from the outside, waiting to see what the machine will do. The universe is looking through your eyes, choosing through your attention, and creating through your participation. You are not separate from the cosmos. You are the cosmos exercising, through the specific instrument of your consciousness, the same freedom that the Conway-Kochen theorem attributes to every particle in the universe. But freedom that is not exercised is freedom wasted. And this is where the investigation moves from theory to practice, from physics to ethics, from the laboratory to your life. The traditions agree, freedom must be practiced. It does not operate automatically. It must be cultivated through attention, through discipline, through the sustained effort of directing the mind toward what matters rather than what is merely urgent, toward what is true rather than what is merely comfortable, toward what is good rather than what is merely easy. The practice is not optional. Without practice, the default mode takes over the deterministic machine of habit, conditioning, and reactive impulse that Libet measured. Without practice, the readiness potential fires and the action follows, and the conscious mind arrives too late, narrating a choice it did not make. Without practice, you are not free. You are narrating. Meditation expands the gap between impulse and response. This is not metaphor. Davidson's fMRI studies show that experienced meditators have measurably thicker prefrontal cortices, the brain region that inhibits impulsive action and enables deliberate choice. The thickness correlates with hours of practice. The more you meditate, the more neural tissue is devoted to the infrastructure of freedom. The brain literally builds more freedom through practice. Schwartz's OCD patients demonstrated the same principle. 12 weeks of directed attention physically restructured the caudate nucleus. The brain is not a fixed machine. It is a plastic, adaptive, responsive system that builds the capacities you exercise and allows the capacities you neglect to atrophy. If you exercise the capacity for conscious choice through meditation, through deliberate attention, through the repeated effort of redirecting the mind from impulse to intention, the brain builds more of the neural infrastructure that supports conscious choice. You become literally, neurally, measurably more free. Prayer aligns the will with a purpose larger than the ego's desires. The neuroscience of prayer, studied by Andrew Newberg at Thomas Jefferson University, shows that contemplative prayer reduces activity in the parietal lobe, the brain region that maintains the sense of self-other boundary. In deep prayer, the boundary softens. The sense of isolated selfhood, the ego that fights for its own interests, that reacts to threats, that clings to desires, becomes less dominant. And in its place arises a sense of connection to something larger, something deeper, something that the traditions call God, the Tao, the Dharma, Brahman. This connection does not eliminate agency. It transforms agency. It redirects the will from self-serving impulse to self-transcending purpose. The choice is still yours, but the options from which you choose have expanded because the softening of the ego boundary has revealed possibilities that the ego's defensive posture had concealed. Ethical discipline strengthens the neural veto, the capacity to say no to the impulse and yes to the intention. Every time you resist an impulse, every time you choose patience over anger, generosity over greed, honesty over convenience, you strengthen the prefrontal circuits that support conscious override. This is Hebbian learning applied to moral agency. Neurons that fire together wire together, and the neurons that fire during acts of conscious restraint wire into stronger, faster, more reliable circuits of moral choice. The traditions call this virtue. Neuroscience calls it neuroplasticity. The mechanism is the same. Repeated practice builds the neural infrastructure that makes the next exercise of freedom easier, faster, and more reliable. Contemplation deepens the perception of the options available, revealing possibilities that the conditioned mind has excluded, expanding the quantum superposition of neural templates from which process one can select. And love, the traditions are unanimous. On this, love is the highest expression of free will, because love is the choice to attend to another being, to direct your consciousness toward them, to stabilize their well-being in your awareness, to participate in their flourishing through the quantum Zeno effect of sustained, focused, compassionate attention. Love is not a feeling that happens to you. Love is a choice you make, a choice to attend, a choice to care, a choice to participate. And this choice, the choice to love, may be the freest act available to a human being. It is not determined by the brain's habitual patterns. Love often contradicts self-interest, comfort, and conditioning. It is not random. Love is directed, intentional, sustained. It is the third thing, the quantum possibility that is neither caused nor random, but chosen. Chosen by an agent who could have chosen otherwise. Chosen in a moment that is genuinely open. Chosen with a freedom that is real, bounded, participatory, and in the deepest sense creative. You are free. Not because physics has proven it beyond doubt, not because the traditions guarantee it, not because the experiments have settled the question. You are free because the evidence from neuroscience, from quantum mechanics, from 4,000 years of contemplative practice points toward a universe in which freedom is possible, a universe in which the observer participates, a universe in which attention shapes reality, a universe in which the gap between impulse and response is real, expandable, and yours to inhabit. The gap is yours. The choice is yours. The attention is yours. And what you do with it, what you attend to, what you stabilize, what you choose, what you love, will determine not just the trajectory of your neural activity, but the trajectory of your life, of your relationships, of the small corner of the cosmos that your consciousness illuminates. The traditions did not solve the free will problem. The quantum physicists did not solve it. Libet did not solve it. No one has solved it. But together the neuroscience, the quantum mechanics, and the contemplative wisdom of every tradition, they have revealed something more valuable than a solution. They have revealed the question's depth, and they have revealed that the answer is not theoretical, it is practical. It is not something you discover in a laboratory. It is something you exercise in a life. Are you free? The answer is in your next choice. Not your next impulsive reaction. The brain generates those without your consent. Your next conscious choice. The next moment when you notice an impulse arising and pause for a fraction of a second, for a breath, for the duration of a heartbeat, and in that pause, that gap, that quantum window between the readiness potential and the action, you select, you direct your attention, you choose which template to stabilize. You exercise the capacity that evolution built, that quantum mechanics permits, that the traditions have been training for 4,000 years, and that neuroscience has begun to measure. That pause is the most important moment in your life. It is the moment when you stop being a machine and start being a person. It is the moment when the readiness potential fires and you, not your brain, not your conditioning, not your habits, not your hormones, decide what happens next. The traditions say you can expand that moment, that you can make it wider, deeper, more spacious, that through practice, through the sustained, disciplined daily effort of attending to your own consciousness, you can turn a millisecond gap into a lifetime of genuine agency. The neuroscience agrees, the quantum mechanics permits it, the traditions prescribe it, make it count.